Everyone, it's Jason from GameRave.com. Welcome to Season 4 of GameRaveTV. Now, oddly enough, Season 4 starts with the letter legacy that deals with 4 letters. We are going to be dealing with N, O, P, and Q. Now, as it goes, 2 of the letters actually have a diverse set of games to them, and 2 of the other letters only have a couple games to them. So we're going to be hopping around quite a bit. That being said, let's get started, letter N. Now, it would be a disservice to the PlayStation, especially with the letter N, to not give credit to all the sports games on the PlayStation. When the system launched in 1995, it did something that no other game system could do before it. It made gaming universal. It was no longer a children's hobby or a geek thing to do. I've been in retail for over 20 years, God help me, and I can still remember the day that Madden 97 came out for PlayStation, and there was a line out the door to get that game, and it was people of all ages, 35-year-olds, parents, teenagers, kids, armchair quarterbacks, casuals, hobbyists. They were all there, and although none of the sports games make the final cut for the letter legacy, the PlayStation 1 still had some of the best sports games ever released, including some of the NHL games, some of the later Maddens. Game Day 98 is just one of the top sports games of its time. We'll move on. Now, for our final contestants in the letter N, we start with N2O, or nitrous oxide. A somewhat Tempest-like game where you basically are shooting through a tube, shooting the bad guys. The game actually gained notoriety before it came out simply because of the name nitrous oxide. A lot of people, especially in parent groups, were afraid that its reference to the use of nitrous oxide in hallucinatory hobbies, so to speak, was going to have a negative effect on people and blah, 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 blah. And of course, just like every other freak out, nothing happened. The game also has a phenomenal soundtrack. Also in the running is Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit. The Need for Speed series actually started on the PlayStation, and although the first outing and the second outing were a little rough around the edges, Need for Speed 3 truly nailed it. Just excellent speed in the driving, good control on the cars, very nice graphics, a whole bunch of cool gameplay options. It's actually one of the few, it's actually one of the only Need for Speeds I'll actually play aside from Need for Speed Most Wanted, and that's only just because it's by Criterion. There's also Nectaris, otherwise known as Military Madness from the TurboGrafx. Now, if you've never played Military Madness, or Nectaris in this case, it is one of the best turn-based strategy games you'll ever play. It's extremely simple in its layout, extremely simple in its control. It's essentially surround an enemy, blow them up with your tanks and soldiers. The TurboGrafx one is a little bit more collectible than the PlayStation version, but check it out, just track it down. It's one of the best games ever, and this is totally a fanboy moment, but we'll move on. There's also the Nuclear Strike series. Now, I've actually never really been able to get into the Strike series myself. However, after playing Nuclear Strike, it has one of the best cinematics and tones you can ever see in a video game. Despite being ever so slightly cheesy due to the time frame the game was made, the full motion video actors just do a great job of conveying the urgency and, at the time, almost Matrix-like use of the nuclear weapons in the game. The guy who plays your commander just delivers some of the best lines you've ever seen in a video game. Our final contender for N is the Namco Collection. This is actually 5 separate releases bundled in together. Essentially, each disc has a couple of arcade games from Namco's history, including Pac-Man, Ms. Pac-Man, Ordyne, a whole bunch of good things. These games, while actually was going to be the choice for the endgame, gets negated by the fact that Namco has re-released all these games every 3 years on another new system. You can actually get damn near every game from this collection on the Namco Museum release for PlayStation 2 and so forth. Sometimes you can even find them cheaper as well. Oddly enough, that means the winner for the N letter is N2O. Moving on to the letter O. Letter O is actually one of my favorite letters in the letter game, just because, with only being like about 7 to 10 games in there, there's actually a diverse set of different games, and B, there's a lot of cool little niche games that people should enjoy. For example, Overblood. Overblood is a very early PlayStation release that essentially introduced 3D camera work to a Resident Evil-like game. The acting's cheesy, the game itself is decent, but what made it fun to play was the fact that it truly was a puzzle game. Like, there's only 3 or 4 creatures in the entire game you have to worry about. Everything else is trying to figure out how to get out of this room, or how to use the right tool in the right area, or figure out the password. And for how obscure it is nowadays, it's really worth tracking down. Next on the O finalists is Omega Boost, a really cool mech shooter, kind of like Afterburner, but a little bit more going in circles rather than straightforward. It also had an opening song done by a local band, Loudmouth, who unfortunately no longer exists. Funny side fact, I used to actually rent and sell games to a couple of the band members. Yeah. But the definite winner of the O for the letter game is, by leaps and bounds, landslide win, is the game 1. Now, 1 is a game released by the now defunct ASC Games, and it was a action platformer. And when I say action platformer, I mean insane jumps, explosions every 10 seconds, crazy shenanigans, laser beam shotguns, etc. It is one of the hardest games you will ever play on the PlayStation, and it's actually one of the easiest to obtain. I cannot express how fun this game is. Just track it down, go play it. It's absolutely phenomenal. But just don't throw a controller at the difficulty. Next up is P. Now, P had a whole ton of games to it, and there are some amazing runners-up, and this one was actually really hard to pick a winner. But the winner is actually very important because it's actually technically a history lesson. That being said, runners-up: Pac-Man World, Parasite Eve, excellent RPG action-adventure game from Square. You've got Pocket Fighter, great little puzzle fighting game from Capcom. You've got Power Slave, one of the best first-person shooters a la Doom style on the system. However, if you have a Saturn, it's actually better on the Saturn, which is kind of weird to say. And of course, who can forget Poi Poi, which is basically dodgeball but with random objects, and Power Shovel, a little known arcade game brought over from Japan that, while better with the actual Power Shovel controller, is still fun because you get to basically break a car. As well as Parappa the Rapper, one of the first games to truly bring the music genre kicking and screaming into the limelight. That all said and done, the winner for P is actually the series of games called Point Blank. Now, Point Blank is an important addition to the letter game because it actually requires an accessory, and that's the gun con. Now, you can actually play the game with a controller, basically making it a mouse, drag an icon, shoot. But if you can track down the gun con, and you can track down a CRT tube TV from Goodwill for a couple bucks, the Point Blank series was some of the best arcade light gun games to ever come home to a console. Just an absolute amount of crazy diverse mini games. You've got the 2 little main characters running around doing different stuff. In other games like Virtua Cop and my favorite Time Crisis and stuff like that, once you got done with the game, there really wasn't much to do because it was the same stuff over and over again. With Point Blank, there were just so many mini-games and diverse ideas to the mini-games that it never really got old. The problem is because new TVs these days can't support a real light gun. Most of the LCD light guns are just a freaking mouse like a Wiimote. It's really a lost genre, and it needs to come back in some way, but it has to have the hardware to support it. Now, that might be through VR and Project Morpheus and Oculus Rift, but it really needs to come back. I like shooting games with the clicky sound. Alright, that leaves us with Q. Now, Q only has 3 games to it, so technically they're all finalists. That being said, they actually are all legitimate finalists. We've got Qbert, which was one of the few remasters on the PlayStation that was actually really well done, including both the original arcade game and the remaster. You've got Quix Neo, which was a new take on an old arcade game as well, where the original arcade was more or less just a couple of vector graphics, but this one adds textures and enemies and all that fun stuff. There's also Quake 2 on the PlayStation. Now, if we're going on elbow grease, and by that I mean like just push the system, Quake 2 is actually really incredible on the PlayStation. Now, it's obviously not a direct port of the PC game, but for what they were able to accomplish on the system, it actually really is incredible. You've got very clean textures, a great resolution, huge characters, good weapon choice, etc. But let's be honest, if you have a PC that can run Quake 2, you'll just play it on PC. That being said, between Qbert and Quix Neo, I'm actually going to go with Quix Neo. The game can get hard and very fast at becoming hard, but it can become addictive. If you've never had a chance to play Quicks on either the Game Boy or the original arcade game, you can actually find this for fairly dirt cheap, and it's totally worth the couple of bucks to throw at it. Essentially, you're just trying to complete a room by creating boxes and not being touched by the bad guys. This ramps up in difficulty, like I said before, and it's a really, really great game to play. And there you have it. N, O, P, and Q for the letter legacy. We're actually running out of letters. It's pretty cool. That being said, we are done for this episode. We are done with the first episode of Season 4. And as mentioned earlier, or if I accidentally cut it in editing, we are actually giving away copies of N2O on Steam. If you'd like a chance at winning one, just hop onto Twitter. We are at GameRave, and go ahead and like today's tweet that actually mentions the game, and we will draw a winner tomorrow morning. On that note, we'll see you guys next episode. Take care.